The following seance took place on July the 16th, 1966, where a sailor by the name of Terry Smith claimed that he had drowned during World War II after the sinking of his ship HMS Hood. He gives a detailed description of what he discovered when he arrived in the spirit world. He is talking to George Woods and Betty Greene, and the medium was Leslie Flint. The following is an edited version of that conversation. Smith. When I first came over, I was sort of bewildered, like a good many more of the chaps do for that matter. It all happened so sudden, and it was every man for himself. None of us really had a chance. It was hopeless. Now it's fantastic because I'm more alive now than I ever was, and I sometimes come back, but I lost interest in coming back. Betty Greene asked him to describe his reactions when he found he was still alive. Smith. The first thing I remember was going up a street. Although it was a real street, in a sense, not the kind of street that I've been used to. It was all very attractive, lovely trees on either side of the road, and lovely houses. I just couldn't make this out at all. I thought, well, I didn't recognise the place, and yet it seemed as if it could have been somewhere, perhaps in California or something, because it was like I'd seen in pictures. A wide boulevard with trees and sloping lawns. It was like a made-up village, but I couldn't make head or tail of it. But I found that there was nobody else about. It was just as if I was all there on my own. I thought, this is odd. I didn't even realise fully I was dead. I thought I was probably dreaming. But the road was not a bit familiar, yet there was something about it that gave me some sort of peculiar inner confidence. I walked along, and there were all these very pretty houses, and it seemed as dead as a dodo. Not a sound, nothing. Then I came further along, and I saw a very sweet lady, a very pretty woman. She couldn't have looked more than about 28, standing at a little gate. It was the first house that I'd seen with a gate, by the way. All the others seemed to have no entrances, no gates. You just walked up the little path to the front door. But this one was at the end, after I'd walked quite a while, and there was this fence around it. And I thought, well, seems a bit odd, after all, the other houses being free of fences and that. Anyway, this little woman was standing there. She looked young, and yet I felt she was old. It sounds stupid, I know. But she was leaning over this gate, and as I came to her, she sort of smiled. I stopped, and she said, "You looking for something, Sonny?" I thought, blimey. I said, "Yes. I don't know what's happening or where I am." "Oh," she said, "that's all right, Sonny. I've been waiting for you. Come in." So I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose, so I thought I'll go in, so at least it's someone to talk to. And she took me into the front parlour. Nice little room it was, very nice, with chintzy curtains and chairs, and it all looked very homely. And there was a cat sitting in one chair, a beautiful black cat, and I thought, can't be dead with cats. She says, "Come on in, Sonny, sit down." So I sat down in the other chair, with no cat in it. She said, "Would you like a drink?" I thought she was going to offer me a cup of tea or something. So I said, "Oh yes, I would, if you please." She said, "What would you like?" So I thought, well, I must go cagey here. You know, I don't want to look as if I drink. So I said, "Oh, I'd like a lemon, please." She says, "Would you? All right." So she goes out and comes back with a glass of lemon. She said, "You know, you've nothing to worry about, Sonny. I've been waiting for you." She said, "Yes." I didn't know what to say. I sat there, and she said, "You know you're dead." I said, "What?" She said, "You're dead." I said, "Oh, come off it. I can't be dead sitting in a room here with a cat over there and drinking a glass of lemonade. And you're solid and real enough. How can I be dead?" I admit it's all a bit strange. At first I thought I was having a dream or something. She said, "Well, it's no dream, Sonny." She says, "You're dead." I said, "Well, if you say I'm dead, how did I get here?" She said, "Oh, that's all right," she says. "I've been given charge of you." I said, "What do you mean you've been given charge of me?" She said, "Well, when your ship went down," and it suddenly came to me, when the ship went down. The last thing I remember was in the water, holding on to a part of wood. I don't know what part of the ship it was. Anyway, it was a part of wood I was clinging to. Thought it might hold me up, but of course I realised it was hopeless now. Anyway, she said, you drowned, she said. Hundreds and hundreds of lads have come over, and every one of those lads has got someone somewhere to look after them. Some have got their own people, relations or friends. Some have got other souls. I'm one who's in charge of you. You didn't realise, but you were directed. You thought you were walking on your own up the road, but you wasn't. You were being helped by inspiration from a soul whose job it is to help people when they come over suddenly, like you did. Well, don't you worry. You stay with me. I'll look after you. I'll be like your mum. Then she started talking about my people, and it rather shook me because she seemed to know all about my people, about my mum and dad, and how they separated, and about my sister, who was in the Wrens. That's the Women's Royal Naval Service. She seemed to know everything about us. I said, well, are you in any way related to us? She said, well, not really, but it was part of my job to know something about your people, being as how I have to look after you. I said, well, that's funny since you say I've only just come over. How do you know about my lot? She said, oh, well, that's not difficult. It's only a matter of tuning in. Tuning in, I said. Sounds like the wireless. She said, oh, well, we can. If we have any special reason for wanting to know about a particular person or persons, and it's a special work that we have to do, and we've got some sort of connection where that's necessary for us to know things, then we tune in. She said, a little time later, we'll go to see your people. Well, I said, well, that'd be nice. Of course, she said. They'll know that you're dead, but they won't know that you're still alive, that you can sort of watch them or go and see them. Now, you mustn't be too upset if no one takes any notice of you. I said, well, I did have an aunt who was a spiritualist. She said, well, that's good. Perhaps we can get something through in that direction. You never know. We'll have to try her. Well, for the time being, you must try and be content to be here. She said, I've got a son on Earth. I'm hoping one day when he comes over that we should be together again. I expect we shall. But in the meantime, I'm going to look upon you as if you're my son. I'm going to do all I can for you and try to make you happy. And you're not to worry, and you're not to feel alone or anything like that. A little later on, when you're rested, she said, this has been a bit of a shock for you. I'll take you out and you'll be introduced to all sorts of interesting people in our community. I said, oh yes, that's very interesting. Then all of a sudden, during the middle of the conversation, this cat did the most funny thing, I thought. It may sound silly, but it jumped off the chair and it came up to me and it sat on its hind legs and looked up at me and it sort of cocked its ears up and it didn't meow. It didn't make the noise like a cat, but it was just as if the thing spoke. Do you know, I nearly dropped. I was so shaken. She said, don't worry, you'll get used to that. The animals over here have developed, to a great extent, their ability to make themselves understood. Of course, on Earth, in a way, they can do that, but we don't hear them speak because they haven't a language as we understand it. But over here, their thoughts are such that they can sort of vibrate the atmosphere, and you can hear the sounds. And it's merely their thoughts being transmitted to you so that you can hear them. Then this cat said, how are you? And I thought, by Christ, this is quite mad. Cats don't say, how are you? And I didn't know what to do or what to say. She said, well, don't worry, you get used to that. Animals are much more sensitive than people realise, and they have their own knowledge of things. They can transmit thoughts, and they pick up thoughts, and you'll get used to the fact that animals can convey a great deal more from this side than they can on Earth. Anyway, I responded to the cat and said, I'm very well, thanks. And then the cat seemed as if it said, well, I hope you'll be happy here. Then the cat went back and sat on the chair and curled up, and as far as I was concerned, it went to sleep. Don't worry, she said. You'll understand that animals have a great capacity of understanding, and over here they can transmit their thoughts, the same as I can transmit mine to yours, without even the effort of speaking if I want to. You can read my thoughts, and I can read yours. Thought is a real thing for us, and it's very tangible, and that's why animals can communicate by thought force. Gradually, as I got familiar with everything, and a little time later, she took me out on what appeared to be the sun. She told me later that there was no sun, that it was illumination from all of us. All life was able to draw some sort of power, but the illumination didn't seem to cast shadows. Although in some places the light did cast shadows. It seemed to me as if everything was pleasantly bright without being harsh, and there didn't seem to be any shadows, and it didn't seem it was necessary to withdraw from the light because the light was so pleasing and pleasant. And it wasn't hot. You didn't feel as if it was burning you. It was a pleasant warmth, a sort of radiance, I suppose. Anyway, I went out with her, and she just pulled the door, and I said, "Well, are you going to lock your door?" "Oh," she said, "there's no need for that here." And much to my surprise, as we went out, the cat got up and walked out and followed us, and was walking along just as it was like you'd expect a dog more than a cat. She's talking away to this cat, and she said, "All right, come along," and she kept calling it Nellie. I thought, well, Nellie's a funny name for a cat. I never heard of a cat called Nellie before, and she must have sensed my thoughts, because I found after a short time that I didn't have to speak to her. She knew what I was thinking. "Oh," she said, "you think it's an odd name for a cat, don't you?" I said, "Well, Nellie, I've never heard of a cat called Nellie. I suppose there's no reason why a cat shouldn't be called Nellie, as well as Tittles or something." And she said, "Well, Nellie's the name that my mother gave this cat." I said, "Your mother? How old is that cat then?" "Oh," she said, "this cat must be now, judging by material age, about 60-odd years old." I said, 60 years old? I've heard cats having 9 lives," trying to make her laugh. She said, "Well, actually, of course, everybody has many lives. You're having an extension of your life. But you'll find you'll have an extension of this life, and so on ad infinitum." I thought, oh, this is a bit too much for me. She said, "You'll grasp it later. You mustn't think that just because you're dead, that you won't have an extension of life to a degree, whereby you'll eventually be able to extend it into another condition of life." I said, "I don't quite get that." She said, "Well, for the time being, don't let it worry you. You'll find that all life is really an extension of a previous life. In other words, you go on and on ad infinitum. You'll exhaust this plane or this sphere or this condition of life in which you are now. Eventually you'll realize that there's nothing more than you can learn here, or nothing more that's necessary to you here, and you'll feel the urge and the need to extend your experience, and you'll pass into a different existence of a higher sphere or plane, where you'll be able to appreciate and learn and experience all sorts of things that you couldn't possibly experience on this. But that may be a long time yet. There's so much that you've got to experience, so much that you've got to learn. You'll have every opportunity given to you to study and to take an interest in so many different things. If you want to, you can do almost anything, whatever you would like to do or be. When you were on Earth, you were very keen, weren't you, on music?" I said, "How did you know that?" She said, "Well, you were, weren't you?" I said, "Yes, I used to be very keen on the piano, but I was never really good at it." She said, "Well, you'll have every opportunity here, if that's what you want to do, and to be a really first-class pianist." I said, "Well, I can't imagine myself being a great pianist. I like good music, and I used to try." She said, "Oh well, we shall see, won't we? Then later on, when you're more settled, and you're more at home, perhaps we'll see what we can do about it." When I came up the road in the first instance, it seemed as if the place was empty. It was like a dead city, with no one at all, yet everything looked trim and nice and clean and fresh, as if everybody had gone off for an afternoon siesta when I arrived. This time going up the road, it was as if everyone was out, standing at the door, or was coming out to the pathway. I hadn't got very far up the road before I was surrounded by people, all sorts of people, mostly young people. 1 or 2 seemed to be elderly, and yet, looking back on it, I realised they weren't old, but there was something about them that suggested they were aged, and yet they didn't look old. I can't explain that. They were all shaking me by the hand and calling me by my name, and I thought, that's odd. Everyone knows my name. Everyone's calling me Terry as if they'd known me all their lives. I realised afterwards that there's very little escapes them if a new person coming into the community, or a number of people coming from Earth into that community, which, as I found out afterwards, was a special community, really, of souls whose task it was to help newcomers and to guide them, and especially young people. And with the war on, there was loads of youngsters coming over. They were all around me and making me feel welcome, and I really felt as if I was among old friends. It was extraordinary, yet I didn't know a soul. They all seemed to know me, and I felt quite at home with them. Here I was, arriving in a place where everybody was away and no one bothered, and now as if they all were coming out to greet me. I thought it was a bit puzzling, so I asked my friend, why is it that when I arrived, no one came to visit me? No one came to meet me or anything? Oh, she said, that was deliberate. Oh, that was very necessary, really. It was partly that you had to, in a subconscious way, for you to come direct to me, and I was the one who was chosen to take care of you. The others knew of your arrival. In every house you passed, you didn't see anyone. Well, their love was so strong that it was helping you, and their thoughts were very real and very tangible. And really, quite frankly, they knew that the right moment would come a little later, once you had adjusted yourself and you'd been helped by me to see and to understand a little. Then you'd be more ready to be received by a lot of people. If it had all been there, it would have been too much for you. You just wouldn't have been able to grasp things. It was better that it should be as it was. Now you're settling in, you're getting to know people, and people are getting to know you. And the next thing will be, once you really settle down a bit, to find the kind of thing and work you'd like to do. But before that, it may be a very good idea if we go back to Earth and see how your people are, and see if there's anything we can do. She said, it may be very depressing for you, very sad for you, because they don't realize that you're alive, and it will make you unhappy that you can't make contact with them. But you did say that you had an aunt who was interested in spiritualism, so we might be able to do something there, but we'll have to wait and see. George Woods and Betty Greene were able to verify with the British Admiralty that Terry Smith was a sailor who went down on HMS Hood and was lost at sea when it was hit by a shell from the German battleship Bismarck in the North Atlantic on May the 24th, 1941. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. England is an ancient land with a rich and violent history, with many invaders and many battles spilling much blood. Over the centuries, many castles and buildings that were built were either destroyed in battle or fell to ruins. However, there are many that have been miraculously preserved over hundreds of years, and if the walls could talk, would tell tales of tragedy and violence. Where the walls are unable to speak, restless spirits can tell their own tales. One such building that has a history of unexplained spiritual phenomena is Hampton Court Palace that sits on the River Thames outside London, dating back to 1515, and is said to be the most haunted royal building in Britain. Originally built for Cardinal Wolsey, Henry VIII liked it so much that he took it as his own, which is where many of the ghostly tales begin. The following are eyewitness accounts of ghostly visitations seen over the many centuries at Hampton Court Palace. Number 5. Anne Boleyn. Apparently, Henry was the first person to see the decapitated head of his second wife, Anne Boleyn, and the ghost has not only appeared in Hampton Court Palace, but also at Windsor Castle, where Anne and Henry resided during their marriage, but also at Hever Castle, her childhood home, Blickling Hall, her alleged birthplace, and the Tower of London, where she was executed, and many other places. Subsequent sightings have seen her with and without her head, where she is seen in either blue or black, and walking slowly with a sad expression or looking angry and upset, and is said to pervade a sense of grief or despair as her apparition appears to drift along with her form intact. Number 4. Jane Seymour. There are many stories and sightings of Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, whose ghostly apparition wanders through the palace and its cobbled courtyards carrying a lighted candle. Jane died at Hampton Court in 1537 following complications after the birth of Edward, Henry's only son, and Jane was the only wife of Henry who died of natural causes. Jane's apparition appears on the anniversary of her son Edward's birth on the 12th of October, where she appears from the Queen's apartments and walks around to the Silver Stick Gallery wearing a white robe and carrying a lit candle in the dead of night, and wanders through the corridors, a wraith with dishevelled hair outlined in white light. Number 3. Catherine Howard. Stories about the ghost of Catherine Howard, Henry's fifth wife, who was beheaded in 1542 for infidelity with younger men, proliferated throughout the 450 years after her execution. These stories were so well known that by 1918, when the palace opened to the public, the space associated with Catherine's story was already known as the Haunted Gallery. To this day, visitors report unexpected sights, sounds, smells, and feelings as they cross the Haunted Gallery. In 1999, during separate tours of the palace, 2 female visitors fainted on exactly the same spot in the Haunted Gallery, approximately half an hour apart. Catherine Howard is regularly seen meandering the halls of Hampton Court. Following her arrest, witnesses say Catherine's figure appears screaming for her life until the guards seize her and drag her away, but Catherine allegedly broke free from her guards and ran towards the door of the chapel where Henry was at prayer, in hopes that if she could appeal to him in person, Henry would pardon her. Henry ignored her pleas, and Catherine was dragged struggling and screaming back to her room. Others have seen her ghost trying to find sanctuary in the chapel, and a palace warder reported seeing a ghostly hand wearing one of Catherine's rings knocking on the chapel door. The corridor through which she ran is now called the Haunted Gallery, and Catherine's ghost can still be seen and heard running down the corridor, still pleading for mercy. Number 2. Sybil Penn. After the death of Jane Seymour, Edward was entrusted to the care of a nursemaid called Sybil Penn. Sybil died of smallpox in 1562 and was buried in St Mary's Church, a short distance from the palace. Strangely, her apparition was not seen or heard of until the 1820s, when St Mary's Church was struck by lightning, and during the rebuilding, Sybil Penn's remains were moved to another grave. Since then, there have been reported sightings of Sybil as a tall hooded figure known as the Grey Lady, walking the corridors of the palace. The first of these stories comes from the Ponsonby family, who were living at Hampton Court at the time, where they complained about being disturbed by the whir of a spinning wheel from behind the wall of their apartment. Legend has it that a small sealed chamber was later discovered close to their apartment, and when they knocked down the walls, they found a room containing an old, much-used spinning wheel that had been owned by Sybil Penn. Number 1. Joseph Sellis, valet to the Duke of Cumberland. Joseph Sellis has been known to wander the halls of St James's Palace, repeating his death throes. His ghost is accompanied by the metallic scent of fresh blood, and is often portrayed as a shadowy figure wandering about the palace. Palace staff have had items relocate by themselves, and have also felt uneasy, as if they were being watched. In the chambers where Sellis was murdered in 1810 by having his throat slashed so badly that it almost severed his head. Staff and visitors alike have reported that the room is always very cold, which is a common occurrence when spirits are present. But the most terrifying vision some people have claimed to have seen is the ghost of Joseph Sellis propped up in bed with his mouth open over a lolling head partly severed from his body. Other spectres haunting the palace are 2 soldiers in the main courtyard, where their appearance shows that they were from the English Civil War, where a fight had obviously broken out and some of the troops were injured or killed. The 2 soldiers in the courtyard are believed to have been part of that fight. During some of the repairs and renovations on the castle, 2 skeletons were found in the courtyard. The remains of the unknown men were removed from the courtyard and given a proper burial. There have been no further reports of the soldiers in the courtyard since then. Palace staff also reported seeing a strange grey mist floating along the kitchen floor, and a guard reported seeing a dark male figure wearing a top hat disappear into the wine cellar. There has also been a sighting of a ghostly dog being seen entering the king's apartments. On another occasion, in 1917, A group of men and women dressed in old-fashioned clothing were seen wandering Hampton Court, where a police officer opened the door for them before they simply disappeared into thin air before his eyes. On 3 consecutive nights in the winter of 2003, Hampton Court Palace security staff were alerted to the opening of a fire door. On all 3 nights, the CCTV footage clearly showed the fire doors opening with great force. However, on the second night, a ghostly-looking figure in period dress appeared in the doorway, reached out and closed the doors. It wasn't just the security staff that had witnessed the ghostly figure. On the second day, the same day as the recording, a visitor had left a comment in the visitor book detailing her sightings of a spectral figure in the same area. If the walls in old houses could tell stories, we would be shocked as to what we would hear. Many old buildings have seen much brutality and cruelty, and the emotional pain that is left must leave an imprint within. That is why, when you walk into some old homes, you feel an immediate reaction, sometimes fear, and sometimes sadness, and on many occasions the impact has been so strong that it has left residual hauntings where the drama that has taken place continues to repeat itself over and over again as a ghostly scar. The following are 6 real-life stories behind America's most haunted houses. Number 6. Whaley House. Construction began on the Whaley House on May 6, 1856 and was completed in 1857. However, it was not only the house that was destined to be haunted, but also the land on which it was built. The land surrounding the house was known as one of the town's most used public execution sites and was infamous for the hanging of the thief Yankee Jim Robinson. This association did not deter Thomas Whaley from buying the land in 1855 and then quickly beginning the construction of his family home on it. The house was the first brick building in California and was in the style of Greek Revival architecture. A few months after Whaley's family moved into their new home, they opened a general store inside the residence. It wasn't long after the Whaley family moved in that tragedy struck, when their youngest son of 18 months, baby Thomas, died of scarlet fever inside the house. Only a few months later, a fire began within the home which destroyed the general store, leading to the Whaley family moving to San Francisco. However, several years later, in 1868, the Whaley family decided to return to the house. Whaley House soon began bustling with activity and became the headquarters for the city courthouse, as well as the home of San Diego's first theatre troupe and the general store. However, this activity would not last, as local merchants began moving to a new established town of Gaslamp Quarter. Eventually, the old town was abandoned and eerily quiet, leaving the Whaley family struggling to survive. Years later, the Whaley's 2 daughters, Anna and Violet, held their marriage ceremonies inside the house. However, the youngest daughter, Violet, was not happy, and she and her husband eventually divorced. Violet became deeply depressed and could not live with the shame, committing suicide on August 18th, 1885. Descendants from the Whaley family have lived and died in the home over many years. This progression of inhabitants had sparked many strange and mysterious sounds, sights, aromas, and encounters for both workers there and visitors. One early encounter was that of the executed Yankee Jim Robinson, who is believed to have been haunting the Whaley House members throughout their lifetimes. Many family members stated hearing the deceased criminal making eerie noises and loud footsteps and leaving disembodied footprints. Some could even hear baby Thomas's ghost with sounds of him crying and giggling when no one was in sight. Others report seeing Violet still lingering on the second floor whilst feeling cold with her presence felt throughout the home. To the present day, no one has lived in the home since 1953, and the house is now a tourist attraction. Many visitors have seen the father, Thomas, dressed in a frock coat and top hat, standing at the top of the stairs, or smelt the fragrance of French perfume and a signature scent. Other reports include mist, lights turning on and off on their own, and crystals in the music room lamp swinging without any prompt. Number 5. Franklin Castle. Built in the 1800s by banker Hans Tiedemann, this Victorian home has been called the most haunted house in Ohio. Even though Tiedemann's life was one of wealth and privilege, it was also tragic, with a number of his family members having died in the Franklin Castle. They included his mother, a 15-year-old daughter, and 3 other children who died in infancy. The Franklin Castle was built with elaborate turrets and prominent gargoyles, and large numbers of rooms were added in an attempt to distract Tiedemann's wife from thoughts of her deceased children, until her sudden passing. Distraught, Tiedemann sold the property, and the Franklin Castle spent decades as a German cultural centre. However, strangely enough, it wasn't until the 1960s when hauntings started to be reported. These included sounds of babies crying, along with sightings of a mysterious woman in a bizarre mist. It was much later, in 1975, that human bones were discovered in a closet. As years go by, the tales of Franklin Castle have grown more elaborate. In 1999, a fire swept through the 150-year-old house with an estimated damage of $200,000. It has since lain abandoned for several years before being purchased in 2011. Number 4. LaLaurie House. The LaLaurie House Mansion is located in New Orleans and was known as one of the most haunted places in the French Quarter. During 1832, Dr. Louis LaLaurie and his wife Delphine moved into their Creole mansion there. The family was renowned for its social affairs and wealth, and Madame LaLaurie and her daughters became influential French Creole figures in the city with their immense style. The family would hold regular grand events at their 3-story mansion, and the guests could not stop talking about how intelligent and beautiful Madame LaLaurie was. However, beneath her refined exterior, Madame LaLaurie was a cold-blooded, cruel and insane person. The LaLaurie house was maintained by dozens of slaves, and Madame LaLaurie became known for her monstrous behaviour towards them. She had her cook chained to the fireplace where she prepared the food, and treated the other slaves lesser than animals. Neighbours of the LaLaurie house began suspecting the worst after hearing whispers of disappearing maids and workers on the property. One neighbour saw Madame LaLaurie chasing a little girl, Madame's personal servant, onto the roof of the house with a whip before the child jumped to her death. She was later found buried in a shallow grave. After a law which prohibited the cruel treatment of slaves was passed and in effect in New Orleans, the authorities impounded the LaLaurie slaves. However, Madame LaLaurie coaxed some relatives into buying them back for her in secret. Stories began circulating about the LaLaurie's mistreatment, and their once popular family members were now avoided. In 1834, a terrible fire, which some believe may have been started by the cook, broke out in the kitchen and swept through the house. After firefighters took out the blaze, they discovered a horrible secret in a locked room located in the attic. Dozens of slaves were found, many of them caged, along with a collection of whips and paddles. Madame LaLaurie and her family were never seen again. Stories of ghosts and hauntings soon began circulating after the horrific discovery, and many recent visitors to the house claimed to have seen some of the slaves, along with strange sounds and events. The home was once turned into a saloon, with many patrons claiming to have had encounters with the unknown phenomena. Today the house has been renovated and restored into luxury apartments for the rich. Apparently, the building isn't as haunted as it was 100 years ago. However, I wouldn't wish to spend the night there. Number 3. Buckner Mansion. Located in New Orleans, the Buckner Mansion was built in 1856 by cotton kingpin Henry Sullivan Buckner. Buckner wanted to build a house on Jackson Avenue that would be bigger and more grand than the home of his ex-business partner and rival. The mansion exceeded Buckner's expectations and was designed with 48 fluted columns and a unique cast-iron fence, which was unusual at the time and adorned with an intricate honeysuckle design. The mansion served as home to the Buckner family until 1923 and is another haunted house that is allegedly haunted by the ghosts of slaves, like the LaLaurie House. One ghost in particular who stands out is that of Miss Josephine, who lived at the house during the Civil War. Many say she still roamed the mansion after her death, and over the years, guests to the mansion have claimed to hear her sweeping and the inexplicable smell of lemon. Her ghost has also appeared on the stairs. Other strange poltergeist activity has also occurred at Buckner Mansion, such as lights turning on and off, doors opening and closing all on their own, and chandeliers being seen to swing on their own for over an hour. More recently, the mansion has featured in the television show American Horror Story, Coven. Number 2. Lemp Mansion. In 1876, William Lemp, owner of the Western Brewery, bought a mansion in St. Louis, Missouri, and began renovating it in a grand style. Eventually, William and his wife, Julia, moved into the lavish home. Between the years of 1862 and 1883, the couple had 9 children. However, one of the children died in infancy. The family was cursed with many suicides and deaths in the mansion, and it soon became a place of legends. One local legend started circulating in the town of an illegitimate son, known only as the monkey-face boy, who had been born with Down syndrome, being hidden away in the attic. Tales have emerged of the boy's spirit haunting the Lemp Mansion. However, no records exist of the claims. In 1975, the mansion was in a state of deterioration and was bought by Richard Pointer, who converted it into a restaurant. While restoring the mansion, Pointer has experienced many unexplainable occurrences. He states, "I was painting the bathroom by myself. There was no one else in the house, and I felt someone behind me, watching me. I mean, it was a terrible feeling, the most burning sensation you could have. I get goosebumps just now thinking about it. I turned around and nothing was there. I started working again and got the same feeling. So without looking behind me, I cleaned my paintbrushes and got the hell out of there." Many employees of the mansion have also encountered unknown phenomena. Pointer's son was closing the restaurant one night with an employee when they heard 2 keys playing on the piano in another room. However, when they went in search of the source, they found every room in the house to be completely empty. Disembodied voices, the clip-clop of phantom horses' hooves, objects moving on their own, and strange shadows have also been witnessed inside the mansion with no explanation. Number 1. Myrtles Plantation. Built in 1796, the Myrtles Plantation is the oldest haunted house on this video. Located in Louisiana, the Myrtles Plantation is known for its dark past, which includes at least one murder. Rumoured to be built on top of a Tunica Indian burial ground, many photos have been taken of ghosts and spirits in its grounds. The plantation was purchased after the Civil War by William Winter, who was an attorney. One of the most famous haunted pictures of the Myrtle Plantation was snapped by tourists and shows a grim-faced girl lurking behind a window, dressed in antebellum clothing. Another photo was said to show a slave named Chloe, who was known to have died on the plantation. The young woman was worried she would lose her job inside the house, so she decided to poison the judge's daughters. However, instead of making them slightly ill, her plan backfired and the girls died. The other slaves working the plantation feared they would be blamed for the murders, so they hanged Chloe and threw her body into the river. In 1992, a photo of the plantation emerged which some say shows an image of Chloe. The London Society for Psychical Research reportedly declared the photo authentic. However, that wasn't the only murder to take place at the house. The owner, William Winter, was shot by an unknown stranger. Still alive, William dragged himself inside and up the stairs before dying on the 17th step. Some visitors to the plantation report hearing his shuffling footsteps. The Myrtles plantation is home to countless ghost sightings and supernatural phenomena. Reports include a chandelier that shakes and rattles, beds that levitate, and portraits whose expressions change.